Hi, I'm sharing with you things I'm learning about the Cold War, and this isn't one of those polished. There's a lot of really good polished presentations on the YouTube that are much better than this. This is just me going, "Wow, I didn't realize this." There was so much that I was taught growing up in school that was just lies. And you know, the whole idea when people on the media dismiss people talking about communism as being a threat, that should give you a warning that the more that you dig, the more you find, the more you uncover, the more they're going to go, there's nothing there. There's no there. Okay. Just look the other way because there is something there. And it's a huge betrayal. And have been terribly compromised. Um, and China was the Cold War. There's a lot of things about the Cold War. What I'm looking at right now is how China was betrayed by our government and thrown into the communist camp. So the Cold War was prolonged by the actions of the United States working in concert with communist countries. And so a lot of bad things happened. A lot of people died because of the betrayal. Now, I'm looking at books, studying works from things like Chesley Manley's 20-Year Revolution, Jung Chang's book about Mao, The Unknown Story. Took them 12 years to interview all the people that they could and write that book, and that's going to be put down by the leftists, the communists. I'm looking at J. Edgar Hoover's Masters of Deceit and General Albert Wiedemeyer's Wiedemeyer Reports, very important book. Um, Reading things like The Spies, The Rise and Fall of the KGB in America by Harvey Clear and John Earl Haynes, who studied the KGB archives. Legacy of Ashes by Tim Weiner about the history of the CIA. American History by Diana West. Blacklisted by History by Edwin M. Stanton. Um, and you go on and on. Stalin's Secret Agents by Stanton Evans. And there's just so much Witness, Whittaker Chambers' Witness. Um, and just there's just on and on there. You read like Strategies of Containment by John Lewis Gaddis. Um, that's an important book to give you the context. Um, so, there's so many things that you could be studying and reading, and then what I'll do is I'll refer to some of these books. I'll read from them. There's several others that I'm working on, trying to understand what they're saying, and I just hope that you'll be interested in the Cold War. So let me begin today with what I'm learning about this. So early in October of 1949, there was a 3-day conference in our State Department, presided over by guy I mentioned earlier, Jessup, and attended by 25 invited outsiders, as well as by State Department officials. And it reviewed the China question. 17 of the 25 invited participants, as well as Jessup and Case of the White Paper Board, were active in the communist-controlled Institute of Pacific Relations. The invited participants included General Marshall, head of the Red Cross in Lattimore. The prevailing view of the conference, as shown by an analysis prepared by the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, favored recognition of Communist China, encouragement of trade between Japan and Communist China, economic assistance to Communist China, and recognition that communist conquests in Asia were the natural and inevitable consequence of a revolutionary ferment. Now, Harold Stassen, one of the participants, testified that Jessup told him privately between sessions of the conference that, quote, greater logic lay with the views of the majority. Now, Jessup's name is found in a weird company in August 24th, 1953. There was a report of the Internal Security Subcommittee. Frank Coe, a veteran of Elizabeth Bentley's wartime Soviet espionage service, was questioned about his relations with some individuals, and he answered without hesitation. But when asked about Alger Hiss, Harry Dexter White, Lachlan Curry, and Konstantin Umansky, who was a former Soviet ambassador, and Philip C. Jessup, he refused to answer on the ground of possible self-incrimination. So on November 16th, 6 weeks after the State Department's conference, Acheson denounced nationalist China's action in firing on an American vessel, the Flying Cloud, which was running the nationalist blockade and taking supplies to the communists. On December 3rd, Atchison said the United States did not recognize the blockade. On December 23rd, the State Department sent a memorandum to Foreign Service personnel all over the world, minimizing the importance of Formosa, Taiwan, apparently with a view of preparing the way for its fall to the communists. On January 5th, 1950, Truman announced that the United States had no intention of defending Formosa, which we call it Taiwan today. He said the island should be returned to China, by which he meant communist China, pursuant to the Cairo Agreement. Now, when the UN General Assembly met in September 1950, the State Department was prepared to depose Chiang Kai shek's regime on Taiwan and admit the Chinese communists to the UN. It was called Formosa then. The American delegation put the question of the future of Formosa, Taiwan, on the Assembly's agenda, and John Foster Dulles, who later succeeded Atchison as Secretary of State, wrote a speech advocating a UN trusteeship for the island. Now, that kind of scheme, that kind of plan would liquidate Chiang's government and necessitate the admission of Chinese communist representatives to the UN because China is named as a UN charter as a member. Red China's intervention in the Korean War prevented this final act of betrayal. Dulles never got a chance to deliver his speech. In the Cairo Declaration on November 1st, 1943, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Chiang Kai shek had agreed that Korea, which had been under Japanese domination since the Russo Japanese War, should it, quote, in due course become free and independent. In declaring war on Japan on August 8, 1945, the Soviet Union announced its adherence to this agreement. At the Yalta Conference in February 45, Roosevelt and Stalin agreed formally that Korea should be placed under four-power trusteeship, America, Russia, Britain, and China, during a transition period to prepare it for independence. When Japan surrendered, Washington and Moscow agreed that all Japanese troops north of the 38th parallel would surrender to the Russians, and all those south of the parallel would surrender to American forces. Now, how the decision was reached to divide that sad country at the 38th parallel was a very much argued question. Sumner Welles mistakenly reported that, quote, the subordinate officers in the Pentagon hastily recommended the 38th parallel because it was convenient. State Secretary Atchison, who testified at the Senate MacArthur hearing on June 8, 1951, declared that the dividing line was proposed by War Secretary Stimson and approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the State War Navy Coordinating Committee, and the President. It's a reasonable conjecture that Marshall made the recommendation to Stimson, who was in an advanced state of, well, he was going downhill. It's possible also that the line was suggested by Marshall by Soviet generals at Yalta when they discussed matters relating to Russia's entry into the war against Japan. At all events, the choice of the 38th parallel was not just something that popped into somebody's mind. And whoever first proposed it was thinking solely about Russia's interests. Senator Brewster of Maine, who had been delving into the diplomatic history of the Russo-Japanese War, reminded Atchison at the Senate hearing that in the negotiations preceding the outbreak of that war in 1904, the Russians proposed that Korea be divided at the 38th parallel. What the Tsar could not get from the Japanese, Stalin evidently got from General Marshall. At the Moscow conference in December 45, Burns accepted a Russian proposal setting up a joint Soviet-American commission with instructions to form a provisional Korean government. In consultation with the provisional government, the joint commission was to establish a four-power trusteeship to continue not more than 5 years. The Koreans, who had not been consulted, violently opposed the trusteeship scheme, and Burns expressed hope that the Joint Commission working with the Provisional Korean government would find it possible to dispense with the trusteeship. The Joint Commission, which held its first meeting on March 20th, 1946, reached no agreement, and no all-Korean provisional government was established. The Russians refused to lift the Iron Curtain that divided Korea at the 38th parallel. Now, when General Wiedemeyer, I'm reading his biography, I mentioned that, his autobiography, when it was sent to the Far East in 1947, he was instructed to appraise the situation in Korea as well as China. His report on Korea, submitted to the president on September 19, 1947, not released until May 1st, 1951, said, and I quote, whereas American and Soviet forces engaged in occupation duties in South Korea and North Korea, respectively, are approximately equal, each comprising less than 50,000 troops. The Soviet equipped and trained North Korean People's Communist Army of 125,000 is vastly superior to the United States organized constabulary of 16,000 Koreans equipped with Japanese small arms. The North Korean People's Army constitutes a potential military threat to South Korea since there is a strong probability that the Soviets will withdraw their occupation forces and thus induce our own withdrawal. This probably will take place just as soon as they can be sure that the North Korean puppet government and its armed forces, which they have created, are strong enough and sufficiently well indoctrinated to be relied upon to carry out Soviet objectives without the actual presence of Soviet troops. Now, Wiedemeyer, he recommended the organization, equipment, and training of a South Korean military force strong enough to cope with the threat from the North. He warned that the Soviet-dominated Korea would menace Japan and the strategic interests of the United States in the Far East. Now, Wiedemeyer's report was very prophetic in his estimate of China's situation at the time. The Truman administration completely ignored it. State Secretary Marshall decided even before Wiedemeyer returned from his survey to submit the fate of Korea to the United Nations. On September 17, 1947, 2 days before the Wiedemeyer report was presented to the president, the American delegation put the Korean question on the General Assembly's agenda. Not only did Truman administration reject Wiedemeyer's recommendation, but the American policy on Korea and the UN facilitated achievement by the Russians of their objective, which Wiedemeyer had attributed to them as much so as had been designed for that very purpose. The first resolution adopted by the Assembly based on an American proposal, created a UN commission to facilitate one, the establishment of a national government through nationwide elections, and two, the withdrawal of occupation forces. This resolution, adopted on November 14th, 1947, the United States committed itself to the withdrawal of its occupation forces, which was exactly what Wiedemeyer said the Russians would demand. When the communists refused to permit the UN Commission to enter North Korea, the General Assembly's Interim Committee authorized it to supervise elections in, quote, such parts of Korea as are accessible to the Commission. On May 10, 1948, the South Koreans elected a National Assembly, and Syngman Rhee, whose party won a majority, formed a government. On December 12, 1948, the General Assembly recognized Rhee's government as the only lawful government in those parts of Korea where the UN Commission was able to function. The Russians had set up a puppet regime in North Korea, headed by Kim Il-sung. As predicted by General Wiedemeyer, the Soviet government on September 18, 1948, informed the United States that its withdrawal of its occupation forces from North Korea would be completed by the end of December 1948. In the General Assembly, the Russians were demanding withdrawal of the American forces from South Korea. The United States soon complied. On June 29, 1949, the UN Commission reported that it had verified the withdrawal of American occupation forces. It received no reply when it notified Moscow its readiness to verify the withdrawal of Soviet occupation forces. So we're going to pick it up again next time. I'm going to stop there and talk about what happened next in Korea, and then go on to some other things. So these are all very important that we see detail by detail how the United States of America government worked in collusion with communist governments, because there were communist spies, influencers, traitors in our own government, particularly the State Department, but other places as well, who were working to make this happen, to make this betrayal happen. And you people dare criticize Joe McCarthy for his condemnation of the communists in our government? How can you be so blind? Or are you one of them? You just a collective, you a communist, I don't know. But I'm seeing this wholly different from what I was raised to see it as. And I hope you'll study the Cold War. I don't care if you agree with me or not. I'm just sharing with you what I'm finding out. But go ahead and comment and make comments if you disagree or you think something's wrong. I'm gonna I'm gonna quote books, read from books. I'm gonna be off the cuff sometimes, but I'm just talking about what I'm learning. And I just hope that you'll be interested in the Cold War like I am. Thank you.